It's time for Agriculture, presented by Turkana Farms in Germantown, New York, a small-scale producer of heritage breed livestock and a wide array of vegetables and berries on just over 39 acres. They also produce a full array of garden vegetables, many of them heirloom varieties raised naturally, as well as an assortment of berries, including raspberries, blackberries, gooseberries, black, red, and white currants, mulberries, and elderberries. And now, here's Mark Scherzer.
Last weekend, as we zoomed from a frigid start around 0 degrees Saturday morning to a spring-like sunny 50s on Sunday afternoon, I took the opportunity to enjoy tea, biscuits, and a lovely walk in his back field with my across-the-street neighbor Adam and his dog Pearl. I knew the weather was just a delicious tease and that we would be back in deep winter again for a good while before the real deal was upon us. But it was enough to evoke for me the hunger for spring Peter used to express about this time of year, when he began complaining of cabin fever and accordingly started planning our annual April jaunt to New Orleans. From the high ground on the walk back from the south border of Adam's property, I got an unaccustomed distant view of our barn and the field running from there down to the road. There, calmly in the mid-afternoon sun, our entire sheep herd, large dots at that distance, appeared to be sauntering slowly back toward the barn from the roadside manger where they had been munching on hay and the remaining skeletons of discarded Christmas trees. Generally, left on their own, the movement of the herd is a very slow-motion kind of event. In an open field full of grass, the herd reminds me of an amoeba or a bit of protoplasm, irregularly shaped. They lurch fitfully in one direction or another, guided by some unspoken signals they convey to one another. Although the herd has some clear leaders, the mechanism by which they decide to shift from one side to the other or to take unexpected turns is not fully apparent to me. Last Sunday, when there was still 6 inches of snow on the ground, the movement was more orderly, single file, up the path they had created to get from the barn to the road without getting their feet too wet. But they always move at a pace that allows older and lamer sheep to stay with the group. I was struck by the contrast between the herd's sauntering pace Sunday afternoon and what I had witnessed just that morning at chore. Then, too, there was a substantial group down by the manger at the road. As Troy, my nephew, and I stocked hay in the barn and the annex mangers and set up their grain treat bowls, many, alerted by our noises and the closing of the barn doors, realized what we were doing and made their way up to gather outside the barn door, ready to thunder in and get as much grain as they could when we opened it. But a few lambs were so absorbed in whatever they were doing that they just had not gotten the message. When we rolled open the doors and the excited baas of the herd reached a crescendo, the ears of the young lambs down by the road perked up. And when they realized they were alone down there, they charged at lightning speed back up toward the barn, bleeding most of the way. In their case, their urgent movement was clearly not for the grain. At that age, they generally are muscled aside at grain time, and they only develop the grain habit over months. It was rather the separation from the herd, and particularly from their mothers, that impelled their mad dash to rejoin the group. The sorts of bleats they emitted betrayed their motives. Both the slow movement of the herd that usually allows stragglers to stay with the group and the mad dash of the lambs when separated express the importance to sheep of the group staying together. Sheep have long been symbols of extreme group think. People are described as sheep-like when they appear to be unthinkingly following some invisible diktat that comes from their membership in the group. People of my political persuasion often dismiss MAGA hat-wearing Trump supporters this way. A friend of mine, decidedly of more conservative bent, told me that the white-garbed women at the State of the Union address last week evoked in his mind the wearers of Mao jackets during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. That comment, in turn, provoked another friend from a far leftier perspective to wonder why my conservative friend didn't have a similar impression of the sea of blue-suited men in the chamber. When we view any group from the outside and assume their similarity to a herd of sheep, we obscure the mix of personal thoughts, motives, and emotions that go into making oneself part of a group and determines the group's movement, and all the individually distinct ways people express their membership in that group. Speaking as a human, with at least some understanding of my own needs, I'd say that flocking behavior, a sense of interaction within whatever group one defines oneself as belonging to, is nearly as fundamental to us as a species as it is to sheep. Peter's winter cabin fever was not simply about the weather. In his mind, it translated into a need to gather periodically at an event like the French Quarter Festival, with thousands of fellow creatures engaged in the same social rituals and rhythmic movements. The addiction I share with so many others to communicate throughout the day via text and email is another expression of the fundamental social urge. The purpose of my communications rarely has to do with their actual putative subject matter. Rather, the purpose is to express and confirm the existence of a personal connection, which I apparently feel needs confirmation. Viewed this way, the inanity of so much communication on Facebook and other social media is not to be lamented, as the social purpose it serves has nothing much to do with its content. Surely there can be ugly aspects to the grouping instinct. Sheep, despite many family allegiances, occasional instances of head-butting rivalries and other divisions, seem to be most desperate to be part of the herd writ large, not any particular faction within. Humans, in contrast, appear to have an inherent impulse to define subgroups and to express social solidarity with the subgroup in opposition to others. How else to explain the apparent pervasiveness of blackface in the history of white male Virginia politicians? Doesn't it represent the impulse of members of one group to justify their privileged position by demonstrating how much they are not members of the excluded other group? Nonetheless, whatever conflict, hierarchy, and tension inheres in the relationship, we humans need to be part of a group. Numerous sociological studies confirm that social isolation shortens lives. Solitary confinement is the most draconian punishment short of death because it so definitively denies satisfaction of a fundamental human need. When we describe people who appear to us to be guided principally by the dictates of their group membership, maybe rather than describing them as sheep-like, we ought to just call them human.
AgriCulture is underwritten by Turkana Farms, LLC, a small-scale producer of heritage-bred livestock and a wide array of vegetables and berries on just over 39 acres in Germantown, New York. More information, 518-537-3815.